Hello, my name's Aviva, and today I have some slow burn romance recommendations for you. So I feel like everybody has their own opinion on what a slow burn romance is. Obviously, every romance is like laid out differently, so some will be slower than others, and therefore it's kind of like hard to say what is a slow burn or not. But the books that I'm going to share with you today are all the books that I think are more of a slow burn romance. So if you're into that sort of stuff, then keep watching. So I feel like it wouldn't be a slow burn romance recommendation if I didn't start out with Mariana Zapata books. Mariana Zapata is the queen of slow burns. I think everybody can agree that Mariana Zapata books are the slowest of slowest burns. Like, you'll literally be reading like a 600-700 page book and they won't kiss until 100 pages before the end, and somehow it'll have been so worth it the whole time, even though you were like always begging for more sort of thing. But anyway, I wanted to start off with Culty, which is a soccer romance. So you're following this girl who is a pro soccer player, and her entire life she's always looked up to this professional player, and like he's the reason she became a pro player herself, sort of thing. And anyway, now she is on a team, and her team is getting a new coach for the season, and who do you know it is? It's this guy named Culty, who is the pro player she has always looked up to. And then the second that she meets him, she actually decides that she really doesn't like who he really is, because he's sort of like a grump. He's not really fun to be around and stuff like that. And basically, they're going to be around each other a lot, and a romance is somehow going to bloom from it. This one was probably my favorite Mariana Zapata book from the ones I'm about to share with you. I have only read 3 of her books, but I really did enjoy this one a lot. And even though it's a slow burn, like I said already, it will be so worth it in the end. Next up, I have The Wall of Winnipeg by Mariana Zapata. So this is a football romance. You're following this girl who has worked for this pro football player for like 2 years now, but she absolutely hates her job. Like, literally, the guy she works for is the biggest grump in the world. Like, Mariana Zapata likes writing like grumpy sunshine tropes. Like, all of her men are usually like somewhat of grumps. But anyway, this guy is a grump. She hates her job, so she decides to finally quit. And then it's like a month later, and this guy all of a sudden shows up at her doorstep and is like, "You have to come back. I can't live without you. I really need you." And then the story is going to go from there. So again, a huge slow burn. This book is like a brick of a book, and they're not going to do anything very romantic until like way later in the end, but yet you will so love it if you're into slow burns. And the last Mariana Zapata book that I'm going to share with you is All Roads Lead Here. So this is basically about a girl who just got out of a really long relationship, and she decides that she kind of wants to find herself again. She's been living with somebody like for 14 years, and she doesn't know who she is by herself. So she decides to move to this small town in Colorado where she grew up with her mother, and kind of just start living her life again. And when she moves there, she basically rents an apartment from this guy. And then when she gets to the apartment, she finds out that the guy that she rented it from didn't actually know that she was renting her apartment, because the kid is the one that put it up on sale. And then the guy didn't really want to rent it out, so now she has nowhere to live. And then he's like, "Fine, you could stay here for a little bit." And then she ends up staying there for a while, and then she gets close to the family that she's renting from, and obviously a romance is going to bloom with her and the single dad that she's renting from. So basically, it's a really good book. This one is very deep on trying to find yourself. Who are you when you're not in a relationship, restarting your life after being a couple for a very long time and stuff like that. But it was really, really good, and again, a huge slow burn. Next, I wanted to recommend the Addicted / Callaway Sisters series in general. This is a 10-book series. I'm holding up the first book, and there are 3 romances that happen throughout the 10-book series. And I happen to think that all 3 of them are somewhat of a slow burn. Some are slower than others, but in general, because you're following 10 books, and not everybody is going to get together, even in the first couple of books, that I think that, if you're into slow burns, then you will find a couple of romances that you will enjoy in this series. So in this series, you're following a group of 6 people, 3 romances, and you start off with Lillian Lowe, who is a alcoholic and a sex addict, and they are fake dating to hide their addictions from their family. And then obviously the fake dating is going to turn into real dating. So, they have a romance going on, but then there's also Lily's 2 sisters, which is the Callaway sisters. And throughout the books, you're going to meet them and their significant others, and then romances will bloom between, all of them. So basically, it's a really good series in general. I'm a huge fan. And also, if you're into slow burns, I think you will enjoy the romances in these books. Next up, I have Birthday Girl by Penelope Douglas, which is a age gap romance. You're basically following this girl who ends up moving in with her boyfriend and her boyfriend's father, and then she ends up having a romance with her boyfriend's father. And it is very taboo. It is a little bit weird, not gonna lie, but it is also a really slow burn. So I don't really want to give anything away as to like how everything plays out, but if you are into age gap romances, it's like a 19-year-old and like a 38-year-old, and especially like, she was dating his son. If you're okay with all of that and you don't think you'll be like weirded out too much, then I highly recommend reading this book. Next up, I have The Brutal Prince by Sophie Lark. So this is the first book in a 6-book mafia romance companion series. And in this book, you basically have an arranged marriage trope. You have these two rival mafia families, something happened between the two of them, and instead of starting a war, they decide to like team up and set up 2 of their children for an arranged marriage so that they can align themselves with each other instead of starting this whole war and everything. And basically, you're gonna follow these 2 people who are forced to marry each other, and they absolutely hate each other because they're rival mafia families, and basically you're gonna follow their romance, and it's going to be a super slow burn. And there's like the forced proximity thing because obviously, they're forced to marry each other and be near each other, and it is just really good. I'm a huge fan of mafia romances, but especially when it's an arranged marriage. There's just something about it, I can't help myself but love it. Next up, I have Broken French by Tasha Boyd. So this is basically about this girl who decides to take a nannying position in the south of France for this guy who is like a single dad and needs somebody to watch his kid while he is like touring the south of France for a month on his really big yacht because he's like a billionaire or whatever. So she decides to take the job even though she's not normally a nanny. She was like an architect and she ends up quitting her job. She needed something to do, so she took this position. It was like a whole thing. But my point is that she's going to end up spending a long time on this really nice yacht in the south of France with this little girl and her single dad. And there is going to be a slow burn romance between her and the single dad. It is a really good time, and there's more going on in this book than just the romance. Like there's a lot of like architecture and like south of France, vacationing, traveling sort of stuff like that. So if you're really into that, and then you also like slow burns, and you're also into like, the billionaire romance sort of thing, like when one of them is a big billionaire and like, stuff like that, then I really think you will enjoy this book. Next up, I have Anything You Can Do by R.S. Gray, which is a slow burn enemies to lovers romance. It is a really cute rom-com. It's basically about these 2 people who have literally hated each other their entire lives. They've always been rivals. They grew up next to each other. They were always in the same school, in the same class, and they were always fighting. And basically now they're adults and they're both doctors, and they both have decided to move back home to their small town that they grew up in because they both got offered the job to be the doctor for like this small town family practice. And then they get there and they basically find out that they're going to actually be working with each other. They got there thinking that like it's just going to be them. They're kind of going to inherit the practice like, alone, but then they end up like having to work with each other. So you have this whole like forced proximity, workplace environment, enemies to lovers sort of thing. There's a lot going on in this book, but it's really fun. It's all good tropes, and basically it is a slow burn romance. So if everything I just said sounds good to you, I really think that you will enjoy this book. I also have Cold Hearted Boss by R.S. Gray, where you're basically following this girl who decides to like apply for this job on this construction crew, and she kind of like dresses up as a guy to like, try to get the job because like who wants to hire a girl as part of a construction crew? And basically when she gets there, she gets recognized by the boss, the guy who is running the job. And how do you think she knows him? Because a month ago they were in a bar and they almost hooked up, and she ended up stealing his wallet, and he did not forget. So he basically hires her, and she doesn't realize who the owner is, and she gets there and everybody's basically like staying on site because it's like an hour away from the town that like everybody lives at. So they're all sleeping there, and she basically gets there and she gets to her cabin and she finds out that the guy that she is rooming with happens to be the same guy that, was from the bar. And then she like freaks out, and he basically starts messing with her and like, trying to get revenge on her for stealing his wallet. But it's like a whole miscommunication sort of thing and whatever. Basically a lot is going on. I'm not sure if I really explained this book very well, but just take my word for it that it's really good, and it is also a slow burn romance. Next up, I have Not Pretending Anymore by V. Keeland and Penelope Ward. So this is a fake dating romance. You're basically following these two people that decide to become roommates. One's a girl and one is a guy. And they think that it's not going to be a problem because they both happen to have crushes on other people. So it's like, what would be the issue with like living with a boy if I'm not even going to be attracted to him because I have a crush on somebody else, sort of thing, you know? And basically they decide to start this thing where they're going to fake date each other to try and get, their crushes jealous. And then obviously, once all of that works out, they realize that maybe they like their roommate more than their crushes. And then, the story is going to go from there. So it is a really cute fake dating book, but it also happens to be a slow burn romance. And I happen to highly recommend this one. This is actually one of my favorites from the entire stack. So if you're going to take a recommendation and you're into fake dating, I say go for this one. Next up, I have Bane by L.J. Shen, which happens to be the fourth book in a companion series, the Sinner of Saints series. And you don't necessarily have to read all of them, but I do recommend reading all of them and in order, only because I happen to be a huge fan of the entire series in general. But I happen to think that not all of them are slow burns, just this one. So I wanted to recommend this one, but really I'm recommending the entire series in general. The first one is Vicious, the second one is Ruckus, the third one is Scandalous, and then this last one is Bane. And in this book, you're basically following this girl who there's trigger warnings for like rape and sexual assault and a lot of traumatic PTSD stuff that follow that. So you're basically following this girl who at the beginning of the book, she gets very violently raped. And now it's a little while later and she is basically not doing really well. She has kind of cut herself off from society. And basically the guy comes in because he wants to do a deal with her father because, she's very wealthy. Her stepfather, it's not her father. Her stepfather is very wealthy. And anyway, this guy wants to do a business deal with the stepfather. And then the guy offers him this thing of like, you get my stepdaughter out of like this funk of whatever that she's in, make her come alive again, and then I'll do the business deal with you. So he basically has to like lie to this girl and pretend to be her friend and, get her out of a funk, like really like, just bring her back to life sort of thing. And then he's going to get the business deal that he wants. So it's kind of like, that sort of storyline. I feel like you can just like guess where that's going to go, but basically a romance is going to bloom between the two of them and it is absolutely amazing. So I highly recommend this book, but also the entire companion series in general. Next up, I have The Simple Wild by K.A. Tucker. So this is basically about this girl who was born in like middle of nowhere, Alaska. And when she was like 1 or 2 years old, her mother decides to like pick her up and move her like all the way to Canada because she didn't really like living there. Even though she was like in love with her father, she really didn't like living in middle of nowhere, Alaska. So she just like took her daughter and left. And now the daughter is like 26 years old and she doesn't really have a relationship with her father because her father has like never come to visit her and she's never gone to visit him. So they kind of like lost touch for a while. And then she gets this phone call that like her father isn't really doing well. And if she wants to see him and really get to know him before he passes away, then she should come to Alaska and visit him. So she decides, you know what, I'm not really doing anything now. I feel like I'm going to regret it later in life if I don't do it, when I have the chance. So she decides to pick up and move herself to Alaska for a while. And when she gets there, she happens to meet this pilot that works for her father's company because her father owns this like airplane company and stuff like that. And basically they really don't get along right away. He's like, you don't belong here. You do not fit in. Like you're all fancy wearing high heels and you really should be wearing like, boots because you're going to step in the mud and you just don't belong here. You should go home. And basically a romance is going to bloom between the two of them. It's obviously going to be very slow because they do not get along right away. But then besides for the romance that's happening in this book, there is also a lot of like finding yourself and getting to know your father before, he passes away and stuff like that. It's a lot more than just the romance, but there is an amazing romance that is in this book that is a very slow burn. And if you are into everything I just said, then I highly recommend this book. This was one of my favorites from the year. And the last book that I'm going to share with you is The Last Thing You Said by Sarah Byron, which is a YA romance. Everything else I shared with you were all adult romances. This is the only YA one, so I figured I would just put it last. But basically in this book, you're following this girl named Lucy who had a best friend named Trixie, who had a brother named Ben. And all three of them, they were really close. They would hang out all the time. And Ben and Lucy always liked each other and they were about to get together. And then something tragic happened and Trixie basically dies. And then everything kind of blows up and Ben and Lucy, they kind of stop talking to each other. And now it's a year later and they're both still dealing with their grief. And they're also just trying to like avoid each other. They don't really want anything to do with each other. They just like want to move on with their life. But they live in this really small town, and they're both basically doing their summer jobs, and they keep bumping into each other. And then, you know, basically a romance is very slowly going to bloom between the two of them. So it's a really good book. There's kind of like a lot of layers going on. You've got that whole like, you know, sad thing going on because, you know, they're both dealing with their grief. And then you have the whole like second chance romance thing. And then you have this whole like, you know, them trying to just like, you know, avoid each other, but they can't really. There's basically a lot going on. It's a little bit more of like a serious book, but it's not too serious. I really am getting off topic here. My point is that it is a really good romance. It is a little bit more hard hitting, but it is so worth it. And I absolutely love this book. But basically, that's everything I wanted to share with you for some slow burn romances. I do have way more than I could have shared with you. I just thought that this was a pretty big stack to begin with. So if you did enjoy watching this video and you want to see some more slow burn romance recommendations from me, then leave me a comment down below. I'm also curious to know if you read any of these. Did you enjoy them? Are you going to add any of them to your TBR? Or do you maybe have any slow burn romance recommendations for me? I'm always looking for some good recs, so please leave me a comment down below if you know of any books that you think I might enjoy. But anyway, if you enjoyed watching this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're not currently subscribed to my channel, please hit that subscribe button. And anyway, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, enjoy reading.